Revenge with Karen.
The envelope was cream-colored and stiff like it came from a wedding planner, not some burned-out subcontractor barely clinging to preferred vendor status. "Thank you, Michelle" was handwritten in thick, loopy cursive, like a grandmother's birthday card. But the return address, Jenkins and Alder Logistics, LLC, a name she hadn't seen in 3 months because they'd quietly disappeared from the books after a red flag Michelle herself had raised about their late invoicing and suspicious invoice roundups. Still, here it was, dropped off by a jittery courier who wouldn't meet her eyes, then vanished down the elevator like he was late to a parole hearing. Michelle didn't open it at her desk. Too many eyes, too many hey, what you got there? Interruptions. She slipped it under her arm like it was just another budget proposal and carried it into the finance archive room, the cold, windowless graveyard of binders and shredded optimism. Alone, she peeled the sticker seal. Inside was a folder. Not a janky office folder, either. This thing was glossy, laminated, printed in full color with the Jenkins and Alder logo in the corner, and the phrase Performance Recognition Q3 and beyond embossed in silver foil like it was a Christmas card from a hedge fund. She opened it slowly, already uneasy. Page 1, Projected Payout Incentives. Page 2, Aggregate Bonus Structures by Division. Page 3, Future Margin Target Adjustments based on internal performance forecasts. The formatting was immaculate, cell styling, fonts. Even the summary macros looked like they'd been yanked from their internal reporting templates. But Michelle's hands froze on page 4. There was a table titled Cumulative Incentive Flow, Approved Disbursements, and she spotted something that did not belong. A $48,500 vendor bonus tagged with an internal vendor code she had created herself for a one-time contract. That code had never been shared outside the finance team, certainly not with a logistics firm who, if she remembered correctly, had never even hit their onboarding milestones. Her eyes flicked down the page, and her stomach turned. 3 of the 5 line items included margin projections lifted straight from her last private draft, the one she had saved, but never uploaded. It hadn't even gone through the internal review cycle yet. That file lived on her hard drive, nowhere else. Another detail snapped into focus. The bottom corner of each page, printed faintly in 8-point gray text, prepared in collaboration with internal finance team MT, her initials, Michelle Thomas, as if she'd helped compile this glowing fiction. She flipped through the rest of the pages in disbelief. Each chart, each footnote, each column of projected growth incentives was immaculate and completely fabricated. Not just extrapolated optimistically, no. These were manipulated, strategically inflated, and built to mirror the actual structure of her quarterly modeling down to the metadata. Someone had taken her architecture and built a house of lies on top of it. She placed the folder on the filing table like it might be radioactive, stepped back, let the cold sweat gather under her arms. Her mind wasn't racing, it was marching, organized, and methodical. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't someone sending the wrong spreadsheet. This was a message. She stared at the thank you on the envelope again. It wasn't gratitude, it was a receipt. Michelle didn't scream. She didn't run to HR or slap the panic button. That wasn't her style. She walked back to her desk, smiled at 2 coworkers on the way, sat down slowly, and opened her encrypted file vault. She scanned in every page, cross-referenced a few entries to confirm they were indeed bastardized clones of her confidential drafts, and she printed a new label for the folder, Jenkins Delivery Contents, slipped the entire thing into a locking drawer in her cabinet, spun the dial, closed her laptop. She didn't know exactly what was going on yet, but she'd been around long enough to know the look of a scheme trying to write her in as a footnote or a fall girl. She looked up across the floor, eyes drifting toward the glass office with the frosted nameplate, Brent Lawson, VP of Finance. He was on the phone, laughing. Michelle's gut clenched. She'd bring him the folder first thing in the morning, not because she trusted him, because if the rot went all the way up, she needed to know just how high she was standing before the floor gave out. The next morning, Michelle brought the folder to Brent's office like it was any other Tuesday handoff, quiet, steady, unremarkable. The kind of thing you do with a vendor budget reconciliation or year-end variance report. She even brought coffee, one for her, one for him. Extra cream, no sugar. His usual, she knocked twice. Brent was already mid-call, headset in, pacing. He held up a finger. She nodded, slid the folder onto his desk, and waited. Yep, we're tracking to that. MHM. Michelle's here now, yeah, numbers Michelle. He laughed at something the person on the line said, that overpolished chuckle he reserved for C-suite calls. Then he tapped his AirPod to end the call and turned toward her, all dimples and performance. Morning, what's this? She didn't smile. Got dropped off yesterday. Courier, marked for me from Jenkins and Alder. That name wiped the grin clean off his face. Like someone had yanked the smile plug. He looked at the folder, didn't touch it. Just stared at the label she'd made, Jenkins Delivery Contents. I thought we cut them loose last quarter, he said carefully. We did, Michelle replied. But the contents are odd. Reference internal projections that were never shared externally. Some financial modeling, mine, that never left my hard drive. And my initials are on the footer. I didn't put them there. Brent finally reached for the folder like he was touching a dead bird. He flipped the cover open and scanned the first few pages. No comment. Then page 3. A slight tightening of the jaw. Page 4, his eyes paused longer. He closed the folder with one deliberate motion. Then he said it, that quiet, surgical phrase you never want to hear in an office built on pretense. Leave it. Michelle blinked. Excuse me? He didn't repeat it, just gestured lazily toward the folder like it was a misfiled invoice. We're not pursuing this. Probably some intern screwed up a template. You know how these vendors are, copy-paste warriors. Don't worry about it. She stared at him. Brent, this isn't a formatting issue. The data matches projections that were never shared. Our payout amounts tied to codes that don't exist in any vendor compliance system. And the structure, it mimics our own bonus architecture. The kind only 3 of us have access to, Michelle. He said her name like a warning, let it go. Consider it closed. She felt her stomach drop just slightly, like a floorboard creaking underfoot. There was no confusion in his tone, no curiosity, no urgency. Just a closed door, and not just metaphorically. He reached out and actually closed the door to his office. Softly, slowly, the silence inside thickened. You're not understanding what I'm saying, she tried again more carefully. They sent this to me, directly. They used my initials, Brent. They knew enough to make it look like I signed off. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and for the first time in 8 years, she saw something behind his eyes that wasn't charm or calculation. It was fear. You've always been smart, said, voice lower now. So trust me when I say this isn't your concern. If someone at Jenkins screwed up, it'll get handled. But don't go chasing shadows, all right? You've got better things to do. That's when she knew. This wasn't about vendor sloppiness. This wasn't about an overeager analyst screwing with templates. This was a cleanup job, and Brent had just drawn a bright red circle around himself without realizing it. He thought he was managing a mess. What he didn't know was that Michelle had already made backups. Still, she didn't argue, didn't ask more questions, just nodded once slowly and rose to her feet. I'll delete the copy, she said evenly. Good, Brent replied. Let's stay focused on Q4. But Michelle didn't go back to her desk. Not yet. She walked down the hall, past the break room, into the quiet little server closet that the IT guys used as a war room. Slipped in with her badge, closed the door behind her. She pulled out her phone, opened her secure vault, watched the file labeled Jenkins Thank You spoofed finish syncing to her off-site backup. Then she opened a new document, gave it a simple title, Conversations Re. Jenkins Incident, dated it, timestamped the meeting, recorded her memory of Brent's every word. She hadn't planned to start her morning by watching her boss slip behind the curtain of plausible deniability. Now she had a new plan, and she'd start where Brent never thought she'd look, outside the company walls. Michelle didn't leave the office until almost midnight that night, long after the hallway motion lights had stopped trying to impress her with their energy efficiency. She turned off her office lamp, closed the blinds, and ran silent audits in a kind of controlled fury, methodical, surgical, and just angry enough to keep her hands from shaking. She started with the numbers Jenkins and Alder had provided. On the surface, the figures looked airtight, percentages rounded to industry norms, margin targets aligned with sales estimates, and even a forecasted incentive tiering structure that looked like it was lifted from some polished internal pitch deck. But Michelle knew her numbers the way a mother knows her kid's handwriting. And these figures had been traced. She cross-referenced payout summaries with archived incentive tables from earlier quarters, reports she herself had constructed, peer-reviewed, and buried in a locked drive because they were sensitive as hell. And there it was, line after line of financial figures lifted directly from her previous internal scenarios, not the published ones, but the theoretical drafts. Projections she'd saved in a sandbox environment. Never emailed, never uploaded. That's when she noticed the copy errors. In her Q2 exploratory file, she had once accidentally mislabeled a vendor rebate cell as a quarterly incentive. A mistake she'd caught within 20 minutes, but it had left a breadcrumb. In this new gift from Jenkins, the exact same mislabeling existed, down to the formatting. They hadn't stolen her models. They'd cloned them, errors and all. She kept going. It got worse. 2 vendors, both marked inactive in their procurement system, had payout entries in the Jenkins document totaling just over $117,000. When she pulled up historical payment data, she saw that the actual payments had gone out. Twice. Once under their legitimate project IDs, and once rerouted under new vendor codes that traced back to similar-sounding shell accounts. Different mailing addresses. Same tax ID ranges, all logged with signatures from Michelle. Except she'd never seen those approval memos. She opened the internal ledger tool, filtered by authorization ID, and saw 3 approvals from her account for incentive packet validation. Each had the correct user ID, timestamped in the middle of a 3-day window when she'd been out sick with strep throat. She hadn't touched a laptop. Hell, she'd barely touched soup. But there they were. 3 signed memos, greenlit under her name, backed by a VPN login from her old MacBook, one she'd turned in months ago when IT rolled out new hardware. Jesus Christ, she whispered to no one. They weren't just trying to pad vendor bonuses. They were framing her. Poorly, but enough to bury her if she hadn't noticed. Her hands hovered over the keyboard as she stared at the memos. The signature metadata looked real. File hashes passed integrity checks. Whoever had done this knew just enough to fake the pieces, not enough to erase the trail entirely. Michelle didn't panic. She got precise. First, she pulled her archived models and cross-compared every figure in the Jenkins packet, marking matches in red and errors in yellow. The result looked like a battlefield, a rainbow of falsified overlaps, cloned assumptions, and outright lies. Next, she created a clean chain of custody log in a private Excel file, noting dates, access logs, IPs, and document hashes. She pulled system login records from the day her credentials were supposedly used. The IP range, internal. Same subnet Brent's office used. Last, she exported her current findings to a 2 TB encrypted USB she kept in her bag for private backups. The new folder name was simple: insurance. No cute titles, no ambiguity. This wasn't for style points. It was for survival. Because if Brent, or whoever else, was dumb enough to fake her approval, they were probably dumb enough to try to pin the fallout on her once the stink reached upper management or legal. She backed up her phone, including every Slack exchange with Brent over the past 6 months. Scrubbed through Teams calls, checking transcripts for anything suspicious. Even checked the audit logs on her badge access. Confirmed she was nowhere near her desk when those authorizations were made. She had the receipts now, not just for what they'd done, but for what they were trying to do. Michelle stared at her monitor, breathing slow and even, eyes locked on the timestamp from the last falsified memo. 10:14 a.m., Monday. That same morning, Brent had stopped by her desk, grinning with that syrupy tone he used when he wanted something. "Feeling any better? We missed you around here." She hadn't realized then why the words felt off. Now she did. They were a preemptive alibi. It was laying down the script. She leaned back in her chair, eyes hard. They thought she'd panic. They thought they could plant evidence, send her a creepy little thank you note, and scare her into submission. But Michelle didn't scare. She documented. And now she had a choice to make, one that could determine whether her career went up in smoke or whether Brent's did. And she was leaning heavily toward fire. Michelle had worked too many late nights cleaning up messes for executives who mistook recklessness for innovation to believe in internal justice. HR was a social firewall for lawsuits. Legal was a PR department with law degrees. And both, she knew too well, reported to the CFO, Brent's longtime poker buddy and golf partner. She could already see the headlines if she went through the usual channels. Financial analyst misinterprets vendor materials, overreacts, or worse, disgruntled employee fabricates claims against leadership. She wasn't going to give them that opening. Not this time. Not with her name already forged on 3 fraudulent approvals and a $117K discrepancy humming like a live wire under procurement. But she wasn't without options. 6 months ago, during a week-long onboarding session for a newly awarded federal contract, Michelle had caught a throwaway slide during the compliance training, something most folks half listen to while scrolling Instagram. Procurement Integrity Reporting Channel, Federal Oversight. The slide had listed a generic-looking email address buried in the appendix of PDF, Contract Integrity at FedCompliance.gov. Plain, boring, easily forgotten. She hadn't forgotten. It was the kind of channel that bypassed internal politics entirely. Built for whistleblowers, Fed-protected, quiet, surgical. She hadn't paid much attention at the time, just another checkbox in a sea of contracts. Now it was her lifeline. She didn't send it from her work computer. That would have been amateur hour. Michelle drove home in silence, every lane change replaying Brent's expression when he told her to leave it. Every blink of her turn's signal echoed like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. At home, she booted up her personal laptop, opened her secure Linux partition. Disabled her VPN. She didn't want this traceable to any exit node she'd used before. She created a brand new Proton Mail account with no identifying info. No name, no recovery options, just a random string, MHX 4721 at ProtonMail.com. She crafted the email in a separate text editor first. Read it over 10 times. Subject: Compliance Concern Vendor Activity Body. Possible performance inflation and falsified vendor documentation attached. Recommend review. That was it. No fluff, no accusations, just a cold, professional nudge. She zipped a set of sanitized documents, stripped of internal names, IP logs, and Slack conversations, and attached it to the email. Nothing that could be tied to her personally, just enough breadcrumbs for a real investigator to sniff down the hallway. She hovered over the send button. Her hand didn't shake. Michelle wasn't nervous anymore. She was surgical. Click, sent, no applause, no thunder crack, just a soft whoosh sound effect followed by a blank screen and a long silence. She sat back, cracked her neck, and waited. 35 minutes passed, then 40, nothing. She made tea, paced, thought about sleeping. Didn't. Opened the email client again. Still nothing. Then, an hour and 6 minutes after she hit send, her Proton Mail inbox pinged. Compliance Concern Vendor Activity. The message was auto-generated. No greeting, no signature. Your submission has been received and routed for preliminary assessment. If follow-up is required, a designated contact will be in touch. Please do not reply to this message. That was all. It didn't say thank you. It didn't promise action. It didn't validate a damn thing. Michelle stared at it like a prayer had just been heard. She shut the lid on her laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the city hummed on. Neon against asphalt. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had, because now it wasn't just her knowing what Brent had done. It was someone with power, real power. The kind that didn't care about office politics or friendly Friday drinks. The kind that would show up not with questions, but subpoenas. All she had to do now was wait. The next morning started like any other. Too much coffee, a freezing blast of recycled air from the vent above her cubicle, and the usual passive-aggressive war over whose turn it was to refill the printer paper tray. Michelle logged in, pulled up her forecasting dashboard, and waited for the world to shift. It didn't take long. At exactly 9:14 a.m., the lights on the badge reader by the elevator turned red. Not blinking. Solid. Quiet click echoed from the stairwell doors a second later. Michelle looked up. The little green exit light above the double doors was still glowing, but the door beneath it, deadlocked. Someone had locked the floor. No announcement, no overhead alert, just a quiet, well-orchestrated shutdown of movement. Michelle's fingers stilled on her keyboard. She wasn't panicking. She was confirming. Because 10 minutes ago, she'd sent her final evidence pack to a mirrored inbox listed on that same compliance slide, the one reserved for high-priority fraud escalations. Apparently, they'd been waiting for it. At 9:17 a.m., the elevator dinged, twice. 2 men stepped out, not security, not HR. These guys didn't wear branded fleeces or carry visitor badges. Black windbreakers, clipboards. One had a federal lanyard tucked into his shirt. Other held a sealed yellow envelope with the words Procurement Oversight Active Review in bold red letters. They didn't speak to the receptionist. They didn't even glance around. They moved like they'd been here before, and maybe they had. Michelle watched without blinking as they walked straight to Brent's office and closed the door behind them. No knock, no check-in, just in. Less than a minute later, a soft ping echoed over the intercom. Brent Lawson, please report to the lobby. Everyone on the floor paused, then pretended not to hear it, because nobody pages Brent Lawson, ever. Michelle watched the door to his office open again. Brent stepped out, looking pale, eyes darting. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't take his laptop. He just walked, brisk, a little too fast, toward the elevators with the two men at his side. They didn't touch him. They didn't have to. He looked like a man walking into his own autopsy. By 9:30 a.m., two directors, finance ops and procurement strategy, had also mysteriously left for impromptu meetings. Michelle saw one of them grab his coat and whisper something to his assistant before ducking into the executive conference room with his phone pressed tight to his ear. The floor buzzed with confused silence. No one said a word out loud, but Slack lit up like a Christmas tree. WTF is going on? Did you see Brent? Were those guys? Was that a federal badge? I swear I heard someone say OIG just now. Michelle didn't respond, didn't type, didn't blink too long at anyone chat. She just minimized Slack, opened her encrypted drive, and plugged in a small matte black USB drive from her purse. One click, one folder, one upload. Insurance final full backup zip every chat log, every timestamp, every copy of the forged memos. Her badge swipe logs. Vendor payments, server logs showing her device offline the day those files were authorized. All of it. She tucked the flash drive back into her purse, right between her emergency Advil and the breath mints she never used, but always carried. Across the room, a junior analyst dropped her reusable water bottle. The loud thud broke the silence and startled half the department. Someone muttered Jesus and chuckled nervously. Michelle didn't look up, just opened a blank spreadsheet and began documenting everything she saw. Time, location, who went where, when Brent left, what badge readers changed color, who whispered, who packed up quickly, who suddenly had calendar invites labeled offsite sync. This wasn't paranoia, this was her edge. She wasn't part of the mess anymore. She was the historian of its unraveling. And somewhere inside this building, the wheels were already grinding. Not slowly, not bureaucratically, with the violent momentum of someone, somewhere, finally saying, enough. Michelle glanced at the locked stairwell door again, then back to her screen. Let the games begin. They came for her just before lunch, not in cuffs, not in front of everyone. Just a polite knock on the glass divider of her cubicle and a quiet Michelle. Could we borrow you for a few minutes? Delivered by a woman in a navy blazer and expressionless flats. No badge, no name, just the clipped tone of someone used to being obeyed without question. Michelle stood up slowly, heart pounding, every nerve on edge. This was the moment, the fork in the road. If she was wrong, if this was a setup or a backroom fallout cleanup, she could be walking into a trap. If she was right, she was walking into history. She nodded. Of course. They didn't speak as they led her down the hallway, two people flanking her like she was radioactive, but still useful. She caught coworkers watching from behind computer screens, pretending to type. Someone leaned out of the break room just enough to catch a glimpse, then ducked back in like it burned. The woman opened a door near the end of the executive wing. A conference room, but not one of the flashy ones with chrome chairs and faux succulents. This one was functional. Cold, neutral gray carpet, a pitcher of untouched water, a stack of sealed folders. Inside were two men. One older, eating glasses perched low, scribbling notes. The other younger, sharper. He stood as she entered. Michelle Thomas? The younger one said. She nodded. He extended a hand. Michael Kessler, Office of Inspector General. This is David Tran, Forensic Compliance Unit. She shook both hands, firm grip, no tremble. She sat. Kessler sat across from her, pulled a file from his satchel, opened it slowly. First, thank you, he said, voice even, for raising flags. Assume you're aware this entire floor was placed under soft lockdown this morning. Michelle gave a single nod. He slid a sheet across the table. This is a formal grant of immunity under Title V U.S.C. Section 2303. You are not the target of this investigation. You are, at this point, a cooperating informant. She read it once, then again. Her signature line was already printed at the bottom. I can get counsel, she said carefully. Kessler nodded. You can, but you don't need one for this meeting. This isn't custodial, it's a walkthrough. Michelle picked up the pen, signed. She felt the weight shift. Something invisible unlatched from her shoulders. Kessler opened his laptop. Tran pressed record on a small gray device that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Bush administration. Michelle, Kessler began, we're going to ask you to take us through how, in your opinion, someone could have inflated bonus disbursements, routed incentive structures, and falsified internal approvals without triggering the automated red flags your system uses. Michelle didn't even hesitate. She'd prepared for this moment without knowing it for years. She leaned forward. It starts with the approval delay loophole, she began. There's a 72-hour window between memo signature and flag generation on the disbursement queue. If you piggyback bonus adjustments onto quarterly payouts during that window, slip through the filters, trans-scribbled notes. Kessler's fingers flew across the keyboard. She continued. They used inactive vendor codes and cloned internal ones with similar suffixes. The payments routed to matching shell accounts, and because the shell vendors had previously cleared onboarding, no flags were raised. The amount stayed just under the audit threshold. Kessler raised an eyebrow, and the falsified approvals? Michelle opened her folder, slid a page across. "This is mine," she said, pointing to the header. "And this is not. They copied my formatting, but the field alignment is off by 3 pixels and the signature hash is a clone. Not unique," Tran blinked. "You memorized your signature hashes?" "I designed the template," Michelle replied. "I know what it's supposed to look like." Kessler looked at her, really looked, then smiled just faintly. "You're very precise." Michelle met his eyes. "I have to be. They were counting on me not being." He sat back. "Are aware your VP, Brent Lawson, is now under formal review, along with 2 procurement directors and 1 offshore intermediary." She nodded. "Are you willing to testify if needed?" "Yes." No hesitation, she folded her hands. "They forged my name. They tried to hang this on me. I'm not hesitating. I'm documenting." Kessler nodded slowly. "Then we're going to need you to stay quiet for the next 72 hours. You'll be contacted by federal counsel, be freezing multiple accounts and halting all third-party disbursements effective immediately. Until further notice, you'll remain in your position, no demotion, no suspension. But your activities will be mirrored and recorded. That's for your protection." Michelle accepted this like she accepted audits. Expected, necessary. They let her out through a side hallway. No parade, no walk of shame. Just a quiet return to her desk while the office whispered. Back at her cubicle, inbox had already gone still. Slack channels muted. The tension in the air now had shape. Michelle sat down, exhaled. For the first time in days, she wasn't playing defense. She was now the one holding the ledger, and she was done flinching. The memo hit inboxes at exactly 3:02 p.m., delivered with the sterile subject line only HR could invent: operational update, temporary adjustments to procurement policy. Michelle opened it slowly, knowing the words before reading them. She didn't even need to see the sender to recognize the tone, somewhere between tranquilized panic and weaponized vagueness. In light of recent inquiries, and in alignment with our ongoing commitment to financial transparency, all third-party vendor disbursements, contract renewals, and bonus incentive transactions are hereby suspended pending internal review. Additional updates will be shared as appropriate. No names. No details. Just enough corporate frosting to mask the fact that someone had lit the procurement playbook on fire and tossed it out the window. But Michelle didn't need names. She knew exactly who that memo was about. By 3:30 p.m., the Slack threads were howling. "Did we lose a vendor? Is this about the Jenkins thing? What the hell is happening? Where's Brent?" Someone said he left with feds. No one said Michelle's name, not directly. But eyes lingered longer when she passed. Conversations clipped themselves short when she entered a room. People remembered just enough of their own bad decisions to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they'd left their fingerprints on something they shouldn't have. At 4:12 p.m., the second blow landed, an emergency board meeting, scheduled for 7:00 p.m. that same evening. Calendar invites were labeled Audit and Ethics Response Review, with mandatory attendance for every VP, director, and audit committee member. Brent's name wasn't on the list. A few minutes later, a separate message quietly circulated among select department heads. Brent Lawson had been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. No statement, no thanks for his service, just gone. Michelle sat still, letting the information wash over her like a second wind. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't a win yet. It was a shift. The storm had finally cracked open. She was still standing in the rain, not above it. Her phone buzzed, an internal extension. "Michelle Thomas? Yes. This is Lydia from Internal Audit. The board would like you to prepare a comprehensive financial impact analysis tied to historical incentive disbursements, specifically Q2 through Q4 last fiscal year. Format it for the audit committee. We'll need a draft by 6. She blinked. "Is there a specific framework or format they're expecting?" "They're expecting you," Lydia said. "Use whatever framework you think is cleanest." The line went dead. Michelle stared at her screen. "They're expecting you." Not Brent's team, not the finance group, just her. She opened a new spreadsheet. Saved it as FIA Master Review V1. She didn't ask for guidance. She didn't wait for direction. She built the structure from scratch: payout history, disbursement deviations, variance thresholds, shell vendor breakdowns, a cumulative loss exposure model that highlighted every duplicated bonus line like a burn mark on the ledger. When the dashboard loaded, she took a breath. Total overdisbursement across 3 quarters, $2.48 million. That number didn't include projected margin fraud, unfiled taxes, or shell routing anomalies. It was just raw, ugly bleed. She packaged the deck with clean headers, audit trail tabs, a final slide labeled Recommended Safeguards, which included every internal patch she'd pitched over the last 2 years that Brent had hand-waved with phrases like "we'll circle back" or "not urgent." Michelle uploaded the file, sent it directly to Lydia, BCC'd no one. Then she shut her laptop and stared at the glass wall of her cubicle. Her reflection looked tired, sure, but also sharper. Like something dormant had finally been permitted to wake. She wasn't stupid. Not for a second. She knew the whispers would come. That someone somewhere was already crafting a narrative about a disgruntled employee or rogue analyst. That retaliation didn't always come with a letterhead. Sometimes it showed up in the form of project reassignment or a leadership rotation or just a subtle ice out from decision-making rooms. She'd seen it happen. Hell, she'd survived it. But this time, she wasn't expendable. It was the one holding the damaged numbers. She was the one the audit committee needed to understand the scope. She wasn't a spreadsheet jockey anymore. She was the closer, and everyone in the building knew it. Still, as she watched the shadows deepen outside the office windows, Michelle felt a flicker of unease settle behind her ribs. Because even when you're on the right side of the truth, the blowback still comes. And she had a long night ahead. The internal review took place in the formal boardroom, one with the skyline view and the long walnut table, meant to intimidate rather than impress. A tray of untouched croissants sat near the corner, already stale. No one touched the coffee. No one made small talk. Every executive in that room had seen a federal letterhead in the last 24 hours, and the oxygen in the space carried the same weight as a courtroom. Michelle was seated near the middle, one chair away from the head. Not at the head. It was reserved for the CFO and audit chair, but not in the cheap seats either. Her badge now gave her access to floors she'd never stepped foot on before. She hadn't been invited. She'd been required. She carried nothing but a single folder in a leather portfolio. The door opened. Brent walked in. He looked different. Smaller. No blazer, no tie, just a rumpled button-down and eyes that couldn't settle. He scanned the table, and when he saw Michelle, something behind his expression flickered. Something like guilt, dressed as surprise and poorly. He sat down across from her. The audit chair cleared her throat. Let's begin. Brent was given the floor first, and like a man told he might survive the crash if he just said the right words, he began talking fast. There's clearly been a breakdown in documentation integrity, he said, eyes never landing on any one person too long. We've discovered overlapping spreadsheet versions, some drafted before vendor onboarding was finalized, others prepared by procurement without final oversight. It appears certain vendors may have used internal formatting to gain payout approvals. And I suspect a former Jenkins employee who was let go last quarter may have had lingering access, possibly malicious. Michelle didn't blink. The CFO interjected, so you're saying these forged memos, the duplicated bonus disbursements, the inactive vendor payments were clerical errors and a rogue contractor? Brent gave a half shrug. I can't rule out manipulation, but I think we're dealing with sloppiness and external opportunists, not internal fraud. The approvals appear to match formats used across multiple departments. It's not unusual for templates to get passed around. Confusion happens. That was his play, confusion. Muddy the water, blur the line. Michelle waited until he reached for his water glass. Then she opened her folder. It was the same one that had arrived via courier, but the cover had changed. Now it read, Government Exhibit C prepared by M. Thomas. She didn't say a word at first, just placed it gently in front of her, then slid it across the table toward the audit chair. Brent's eyes tracked it like a snake spotting a shovel. She spoke, clear and calm. This is the document that started it, delivered directly to me, marked Thank you, Michelle. Inside, it contains cloned internal data, vendor incentive structures that mimic restricted drafts, and falsified disbursement tables that predate any external sharing. These weren't clerical. They were reverse engineered. The audit chair opened it and began flipping pages. Slowly, deliberately. Michelle didn't stop. Pages 3, 6, and 9 mirror financial modeling versions that were never uploaded to the shared drive. Contain formatting errors I personally introduced in draft revisions, errors corrected before final submission. Their presence here proves internal data was accessed and repurposed. Brent opened his mouth, closed it. Michelle leaned forward. And then there's this, she added. She produced a still frame from a security feed, high resolution, color-corrected, time-stamped. Brent standing in the lobby, Monday morning, accepting a folder from the same courier who dropped it off at her desk hours later. She slid the photo across the table. Lobby camera footage, pulled by OIG this morning, shows Brent accepting the original version of this folder directly from the Jenkins subcontractor. Time-stamped. 8:13 a.m. Brent's hand froze on his water glass. His voice dropped a full octave. That's out of context. I didn't know what was inside. He just handed it off. Said it was for finance. You didn't think to mention that when I brought it to you? Michelle asked, tone icy. When you told me to leave it, he flinched. Silence spread across the table like oil and water. The audit chair looked from the folder to the photo, then to Brent. Do you deny receiving this? Brent swallowed. I assumed it was a client briefing. I get a dozen handoffs a week. No, you don't. The CFO cut in sharply. You've had a courier banned for trying to skip front desk protocol. You're infamous for it. Brent said nothing. Michelle sat back in her chair, the heat in her chest cooled now, replaced by something colder. Stronger, controlled. She wasn't proving anything anymore. She was demonstrating. Power didn't look like shouting. It didn't sound like threats. It looked like her, calmly opening a folder, while the man who once dismissed her, as a numbers gal, watched his kingdom fracture under fluorescent light. And the folder was still open. Still labeled Exhibit C. Still damning. The folder was still open. Page 6 had just been turned, the spreadsheet columns glinting faintly under the ceiling fluorescence. Brent had stopped pretending to understand what was in it. His shoulders had sunk back in the chair. That arrogant lean now collapsed into something brittle, a man waiting for a fire alarm that was already ringing. Michelle hadn't said a word in nearly 5 minutes. She didn't need to. Her evidence lived on the table, her silence louder than Brent's defense ever could be. Then the door opened. Not a knock, not a subtle crack. A full swing, deliberate and smooth. 2 men entered, both in suits. One short, stocky. The other tall and stiff as a coat hanger. They moved like this wasn't their first room full of lawyers pretending to be brave. The taller one nodded once toward Michelle. Miss Thomas. Then turned his attention directly to Brent. Mr. Lawson, he said, removing a small leather wallet and flipping it open just long enough to show the federal badge. You are being detained for questioning by the Office of Inspector General, under charges including procurement fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of federal oversight. Brent blinked. Once. His lips parted. No sound came out. Shorter agent moved behind him, not rushing, just ensuring there was nowhere to go. Please stand. Brent didn't move. No one else did either. The room was utterly still. Then, like someone finally unpausing a moment of history, Brent's chair creaked as he pushed back. Stood up slowly, his hands visible. One of them was still trembling near his belt. The agents didn't cuff him, not yet. They didn't need the theatrics. But the symbolism was enough, because the faces told the rest. The legal team stared like they'd just seen the floor give way beneath them. The CFO, once Brent's shield, actually stumbled back a half step into the wall, his mouth opening slightly as if to ask a question he no longer had the authority to voice. And Michelle? She didn't move, she didn't speak. She just watched. Calm, silent. Every part of her still, except for the slow, precise breath she drew as Brent passed her on the way out. Didn't look at her. He looked at the folder, at the words Exhibit C. At the still frame of himself accepting the courier's handoff, frozen in time, branded forever. The door clicked shut behind them. No one spoke for a long time. Then the audit chair exhaled through her nose, a long, slow sigh that sounded more like surrender than relief. We'll need to brief the full board, she said quietly. Today. Michelle nodded. She didn't offer to help. She'd already done her job. Hours later, after the building had begun to breathe again, after the whispers had turned into outright speculation, after legal had gone into crisis huddle mode, after procurement had issued a routine vendor compliance audit notice to every division, Michelle walked to the lobby. People stared. Some looked away too quickly. Others held eye contact for half a beat too long. No one said a word. The security tray sat by the exit, cold metal with a faint scratch in the center. Michelle reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her badge. She held it for a moment in her hand, ID photo slightly worn, name just beginning to fade around the edges. Then she placed it in the tray. Not with anger, with finality. She didn't look back, or maybe she did. Long enough to see three execs watching from the mezzanine balcony, uncertain if they should wave or run or ask what she knew about them too. She walked through the glass doors and into the early evening light. A breeze moved across the street. The clouds above looked like they might finally clear. Her phone buzzed as she crossed the sidewalk. A new email. Subject, Promotion Approval Acting Director, Financial Integrity Oversight. She didn't smile. But her grip on the phone tightened. Because now she was the oversight, and Exhibit C was just the beginning. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.